every time study is being done. But do you think the unity government has the political will to actually do targeted subsidy?
So my take on it is, I think it's still early days, and let's see what the next budget reveals in terms of how the government plans to deal with blanket subsidies. But it is a well-known fact that this government, the prior government, they all recognize the need to move away from blanket subsidies to targeted subsidies. And the devil obviously sometimes lies in the details in terms of the implementation mechanisms of moving away from blanket to targeted. So these are the things that I think the government might want to look into, or is probably looking into. But I think it's still early days for me to make a clear statement on whether the government has a will or not. I think the problem is well known.
We talked about subsidy rationalization, and then by extension, targeted subsidies might be introduced or might not be introduced in the upcoming budget. Could you tell us what are the problems involved or challenges involved in targeted subsidies? As far as we know, there is error of inclusion and error of exclusion in targeted subsidies. Could you expand on that?
Sure. How much time do we have? No, thanks, Pierre. So let me take a quick crack at it. And again, I invite Yasuhiko, Shakira, and others to chime in as well. So there's a practical issue of why sometimes it's difficult for governments to move from blanket to targeted subsidies. And there's a political economy issue of, again, why it's difficult for governments to move from blanket to targeted subsidies. So the practical issue is that if a government wants to, it may not have the logistical infrastructure to identify people to whom the targeted subsidy should go to. Now, in the case of Malaysia, we actually have, that is not an issue, because we actually have something called the BKM, which is quite successful in using, in deploying cash transfers to those affected during the COVID crisis, right? So, of course, there are issues you can, there are things you can tweak, areas of inclusion, exclusion, as you mentioned. No targeted mechanism is perfect, but I would argue that it's okay to have some errors of inclusion, but they shouldn't come at the cost of errors of exclusion. And in some ways, Indonesia, which has a good track record of subsidy removal, did that. Now, the other practical issue is that you might have too many schemes that are fragmented, making it difficult to coordinate and then to reach out to those affected. And that, I think, is an issue in Malaysia, and I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, how many schemes we have. If anybody knows, they can help me out. But the point is that there is a fragmented framework. But again, we have BKM. You know, if nothing else, you can just use BKM to push through these subsidies. That's one. The second is a political economy issue. Is that who benefits from current subsidies most? Is the top and the middle end income ends of the spectrum, right? So if you remove subsidies, the top may or may not care, but the middle class would complain. They are the ones who drive the cars. They're not as rich as the top, so it affects the middle class a lot. And because of political economy pressures, because of electoral issues, the middle class in any country is a sizable voting class, right? So that's a political economy issue that the governments typically find difficult to overcome. Now, interestingly, India has done that. So India has the honor of embarking on the world's largest LPG subsidy removal scheme, and it did it not that long back. So how did India manage it? A country as diverse and sort of heterogeneous as India. And to cut a long story short, the India narrative went beyond just, well, we need to remove subsidies because we need more resources. It went beyond that. It went to the point where the narrative became about how, this was appealing to the middle class, yeah? How if you gave up your LPG subsidy, you would build a stronger and securer nation. It became a nation-building narrative, not one only of financial or fiscal issues. And how did India do that? It wasn't just politicians standing up and saying, hey, if you give up your subsidies, you would build a stronger and securer nation. They actually used some behavioral economics insights, nudges, if you will. So anyone, any middle class person who gave up their subsidies, and my parents gave up their LPG subsidy, by the way, you know, they were recognized in a national merit of honor, like a scroll that, you know, that was made public online, and you know, so that gave them a feeling of pride. That okay, so we are giving up the subsidy, we are getting recognized for it, and that money will be used for better purposes. Yeah, so this is often clubbed under quote unquote better communications, but I think it's beyond that. It's a narrative that needs to be third. And then the third thing, I spoke about practical, I spoke about political economy, and there's a third thing that I want to emphasize again, is the fear politicians have that subsidy removal or even, for example, GST implementation would be inflationary. And there I just want to remind you all of what I said during my presentation, that yes, it is inflationary. We find that it can be, it would be inflationary, but the answer is to not do it because of that. The answer is to do it gradually, to put in system mechanisms that would help those who are most affected from these inflationary impacts, and to use this window of opportunity that we have right now of falling global commodity prices, of falling inflation in Malaysia as well, to think about putting this in place.